The sky hasn't cleared since the mountain blew its top. No hint of blue remains, only a permanent haze of ash and sulfur that chokes every breath. Day and night have blurred into one endless, dull gray. The sun is a pale disk, barely visible. Through the toxic veil, its feeble light doing little more than casting a muted glow across a world that's been smothered in ruin, where rivers once wound like silver, ribbons through cities and plains. Now there are fractures in the earth, bleeding blackish water too acidic to drink. Reservoirs are clogged with ash. Wells have run dry or filled with soot when they weren't sealed off by collapsing infrastructure. I remember the roar of the river outside my window as a child now. It's gone, replaced by the eerie rattle of loose metal and the distant howl of wind sweeping through empty streets. The old landmarks, skyscrapers, bridges, monuments stand like skeletons. In the capital, the dome of what used to be the grand government building is half collapsed, jagged steel beams protruding through layers of pumice. Nearby streets are buried under ash drifts, so deep you could lose a house in them. I stumbled across the charred remains of a subway entrance. Metal grates warped into grotesque shapes by the heat. Tunnels filled with suffocating darkness, and the ghosts of those who never made it out. Even the forests lie in ruin. Trees, long weakened by years of drought, snapped like toothpicks under the weight of volcanic debris. Where green once stretched toward the horizon, now lies a dead sea of gray stumps and fallen trunks. Wildlife hasn't fared much better, scavenger. Birds circle in ever-widening arcs, but there's almost nothing left to feed on. The occasional fox or coyote pads through the ash, its ribs pressing sharply against matted fur, eyes bright with hunger. Humanity is hollowed out. Governments collapsed under the strain within weeks. Communications networks went silent as satellites were coated in ash. Fuel convoys never reached their destinations. Authority evaporated. What remains is a patchwork of survivor bands, some organized, some barely more than gangs of desperate scavengers. Outside my makeshift camp, 3 rival patrols passed within hours of each other yesterday, all searching for the same crate of canned food. Diplomacy is a luxury few can afford when every mouth must be fed in the rubble of an old schoolhouse. A group has set up a kind of impromptu infirmary. They patch wounds with ragged bandages, their faces gaunt but determined. I traded some fresh water for a ration of antibiotics. There's no real medicine left, just desperate attempts to stave off infection in wounds festering with volcanic grit. Beyond that, a handful of electric generators still hum in hidden pockets. Radio broadcasters like me keep them alive for as long as fuel holds out, passing along tips for finding clean water or warning of marauder movements. But every broadcast feels like shouting into a void. Static often drowns out the few familiar voices that remain. Institutions as we knew them are relics. Banks, museums, universities turn to mausoleums of knowledge and wealth that no one can access. In a half-submerged library, I found a few moldy textbooks on geology and meteorology. The ash-drenched pages crumble at my touch. It's fitting. In a way, knowledge buried and lost beneath the eruption's debris, much like our world. Sometimes, when the wind dies down, I can hear faint echoes, the distant clang of a barrel rolling across pavement, the rasp of scavenger boots crunching, dried ash, but mostly there is silence. It's a heavy, suffocating kind of quiet, broken only by my own ragged breathing and the low hum of the generator that keeps this broadcast alive. Anxiety threads through every survivor's heart. Every day brings fresh uncertainty. Will the ashfall resume? Will the weakened crust shift, unleashing tremors or even more ash? Will our band of survivors hold together or fracture under scarce resources and dwindling hope? We set our watches by the ash storms when they come. We hunker down in tunnels or basements, breathing through cloth masks and praying our shelters hold. My name is Miles Harrington. Before the eruption, I was an environmental scientist studying ashfall and air quality, crunching data in a lab. I thought I was preparing for worst-case scenarios, but nothing in any model predicted a supervolcano waking with enough fury to cloak the world in darkness. Now, my instruments lie in ruin, their sensors melted by the heat or clogged with pumice. All that remains is this battered radio booth carved into the basement of what used to be the local university. Every morning. If you can still call it morning, I haul in jerrycans of scavenged diesel, top off the little generator with trembling hands, and wait for that familiar sputter, the low hum that reminds me I'm still alive. Then I adjust the microphone, sweep my fingers across knobs half buried in ash, and speak into the void, a voice in the static. It's become my daily ritual, my lifeline, and my torment. I survive on barter and bits of hope. When fuel runs low, I trade packets of emergency rations or sharpened scrap metal knives. I cobble from wreckage. I scavenge for water in abandoned hotels, emptying mineral water bottles from dusty minibars and filling them from corroded faucets. I filter what I can through makeshift charcoal filters, charred branches from the few remaining trees. It's never enough. My stomach churns at the thought of poisoned water, but the alternative is worse. Some days, I breach the surface in a gas mask, searching through skeletal neighborhoods for parts, a length of copper tubing to fix the air scrubber, a spare spark plug to keep the generator alive, a roll of duct tape that still sticks. The world above is deafeningly silent. Ash drifts like ghostly snow, piling into drab drifts. Buildings collapse without warning, skeletons of steel and concrete toppling under the weight of volcanic debris. I've learned to move quickly, retracing my steps before air pockets collapse tunnels, to listen for the low rumble of shifting earth, to pray that the crust doesn't crack open again beneath me. What drives me is more than survival, it's responsibility. Before everything fell apart, I taught students about the fragility of our planet. Now I broadcast what little wisdom I can, how to find clean water, how to ward off ash-induced lung infections, where to avoid lethal hot zones, where the ground still steams. In this new world, knowledge is currency. If just one person avoids poisoning, one family makes it through the night because they heard my voice, then every breath I take and every mile I wander through the wasteland is worth it. But the cost has been tremendous. She was doing field work at the observatory on the mountain slopes when the eruption caught everyone by surprise. I never even got to say goodbye. We were supposed to have dinner that evening. She cooked sea bass, my favorite, and maybe watch the meteor shower she'd planned to photograph. Instead, a deafening roar swallowed the world. After that, I searched the ash-blinded roads for weeks, following rumors of survivors, scanning every overturned bus and collapsed shelter. I never found her. My daughter, Lily, was only 6. She loved to dance in the yard when I taught her the steps to an old folk tune. I still have a fragment of her music box, a tiny ballerina spinning on a tarnished stage somewhere in the rubble. It's all I can cling to, the idea that she existed. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear her laughter in the hum of the generator or see her silhouette dancing past the faded map of the old world plastered on the booth wall. But every time I reach out, the shape dissolves into ash. Grief is a fierce companion. It coils around my chest, making it hard to breathe until I force myself to pull on my boots and venture out again. I've learned that memories can be both weapons and shields. They wound you when they surface unbidden, yet they keep you anchored to something real, a promise that life was once more than this gray tomb. I was never a fighter, a rifle, yet I've had to learn. Raiders prowling the outskirts, ambush lone scavengers, and I've seen what happens when a gang corners you in a collapsed storefront. You either fight or surrender everything you have, food, water, hope for just another breath. I've fought. I've scraped the barrel of a pistol across a man's ribs to make him release a canister of clean water. The look in his eyes when he backed away, surprise, fear, and something like pity haunts me more than any bullet. Yet, beneath the fear, there's a flicker of anticipation and impossible hope that the skies might clear one day, even if just for a moment, revealing a sliver of blue we've forgotten. We cling to the notion that life can return, that somewhere beyond the wasteland, clean rivers still run, green shoots still push through thawing ground, and human voices carry more than grief. But for now, this is our home, a world ashen and broken, where every landmark is unrecognizable, where civilization survives on the edge of despair, and where tomorrow is a promise neither guaranteed nor forgotten. I keep my hand on the mic, ready to tell the next story, because even in this smothered landscape, a voice can be a bridge to something like hope. Still, I keep talking. I keep my broadcasts short and practical. No flourishes, just plain advice. Boil water for 10 minutes. Avoid the North Sector tremors. Still tear open the ground, where multiple layers of damp cloth to filter ash. I end each transmission with a reminder. You are not alone. I'm here, and I'll keep talking as long as I can. Whether anyone is listening, I don't know. But my words carve a fragile lifeline across the silence. Hope that is the true fuel. It's thinner than diesel and harder to come by, yet more essential. When a faint murmur crackles over the airwaves, another survivor, responding with coordinates of a hidden spring eye, cling to that moment as proof that we matter, that humanity still flickers somewhere beyond the horizon of ash. Occasionally, a reply comes, someone asking for more details, or simply whispering thank you. Those single words are worth weeks of rations. At times, the weight of isolation threatens to crush me. Weeks can pass without another voice breaking through. The static, in those moments, I retreat into memory's Lena's laughter. Lily's dance steps until I remind myself that memories alone won't keep me breathing. I breathe in the acrid air, turn the crank on the generator, and reach for the microphone. Because if I fall silent, the world loses one more spark of resistance. The ash storms may come again, The tremors may shatter these walls, and the generator will sputter its last. But as long as I have breath, I'll speak. I speak for Alina, for Lily, for the students I taught, for every family scouring the darkness. For a shred of hope, I am a scientist, a teacher, a survivor, a voice. And until this world is truly silent, I will keep talking. The crisis began the night the ash stopped drifting and the rains came. For months, we'd endured a sky so choked with volcanic debris that every sunrise was a muted gray, every sunset an ashen glow. But then the weather shifted. Clouds formed again, heavy with moisture, and the first drops that fell carried acid so potent they burned exposed skin and stripped paint from steel beams. Within hours, the rivers turned black. The few pools of rainwater we'd collected turned bitter on the tongue, and the stench of sulfurous runoff crept into every basement shelter. Survival has become a daily puzzle with no solution. Water, once the simplest necessity, now demands a rigorous three-step process. Prefiltration through cloth to remove coarse ash, charcoal filtration to strip heavy metals, and finally, a 20-minute boil to neutralize microscopic acid residues. Even so, the pH remains borderline too low, and your teeth ache too high, and your guts revolt. I broadcast those instructions over the static, hoping someone, somewhere, can follow them. But with charcoal scarce and fuel dwindling, most give up after step one, then slip into gastric dehydration within days. Food is no less contested. Crops planted in the scant, fertile patches beyond the ash perimeter wilt at the first acid rain. Their leaves curled and blackened. What little grain we saved from pre-eruption silos is now crawling with bristling larvae that survived in hidden crevices. We've become hunters of rodents and insects, boiling grasshoppers into a protein broth that tastes of ash and regret. Each bite reminds me of Elena's home-cooked meals, her hand kneading dough, the aroma of garlic hand. I'm forced to swallow the memory along with what passes for sustenance. Fuel is the heartbeat of our little broadcast sand. It's stalling. Diesel, gasoline, propane. Every canister has been emptied once, twice, then traded away for medicine or canned fish. The generator coughed its last sputter 3 nights ago, and now I lean the microphone against an old wind-up phonograph motor jury-rigged to a bicycle crank. My thighs burn as I pedal, and the whir of the makeshift alternator is a distant substitute for the comforting throb of the diesel engine. But it works just enough to send a weak signal across broken frequencies. If I stop pedaling, the world goes silent again. Temperature extremes have followed in the eruption's wake. Days scorch beneath the sun, filtered through ash UV rays, less intense but more lingering, like a dull, relentless burn. Nights plunge below freezing as the atmosphere sheds its thermal blanket, and the cold creeps into our bones. I huddle under layers of scavenged winter coats, light small fires in barrel stoves that fill the air with a choking smoke. A single spark too high, and it ignites the ash-laden floor, turning our fragile sanctuary into a furnace. I've learned to stoke the coals with dead branches from the last surviving conifer trees, mutated into brittle, blackened forms by acid deposition. Social order has fractured into shards. In the first weeks after the eruption, local militias formed, claiming to protect resources and dole out rations. But power entices brutality. They patrol the outskirts with rifles slung over soot-streaked shoulders, demanding tribute from any who pass. Bribes of water, jerrycans, or boiled rat broth keep some caravans moving, but those without reserves are stripped bare or, worse, shot. I've traded off my last handful of antibiotics to a patrol leader just to record a safe passage corridor to a rumored spring outside the quarantine zone. Crossing that stretch may mean escape or an ambush, either. Outcome tastes of iron and fear. In the scientific reports I once wrote, I charted temperature anomalies, seismic tremors, ashfall rates. Now I'm reduced to narrating them to whoever listens. The ground beneath your feet is shifting magnitudes, ranging from 2.5 to 4.1 on the Richter scale each hour. Tectonic strain is still unloading around the caldera. Expect fissures up to 6 feet wide to open without warning. Each warning is a double-edged sword. The knowledge empowers, but it also terrifies. Medical supplies are vaporizing under this new demand. Bandages soaked in ash-laden rain fester into wounds that course with infection. I've tried treating them with honey swiped from a collapsed beekeeping facility, but the jars were already compromised. I broadcast folk remedies poultices, willow bark decoctions for pain relief, but every suggestion is a gamble. Misdiagnose a simple infection and you face sepsis. I've seen it happen to a neighbor who ignored my warning. His leg swelled like a rotten branch, then to blackened tissue. I held his hand as he slipped away, his last breath a ragged whisper asking for water that would have killed him. Communication channels are a tangle of competing frequencies. Raiders jam the airwaves to mask their movements. Other survivors call with false spring reports, herding hopeful caravans into ambushes. I'm forced to encrypt my coordinates in coded weather bulletins. Low pressure moving east really means avoid the North Road. Patrols operating. Decoding instructions over crackling static is an exercise in frustration when the wind lifts ash into your face and you're pedaling for your life. Emotionally, we're exposed like torn skin. Anxiety isn't a luxury. It's a constant hum in the blood. Each broadcast, I recount the ash storm forecasts. Expect particle concentrations up to 2,500 micrograms per cubic meter tomorrow, and I taste dread with every syllable. I wear a calibrated particulate meter on my coat, its red light blinking with each dangerous spike, and I relay those readings over the air because someone out there might still be wearing nothing but a t-shirt, and yet hope persists. I speak of hydrological anomalies detected at the edge of the exclusion zone, underground springs that seem impervious to surface contamination, fed by aquifers deeper than the volcanic deposit. I broadcast the coordinates in a veiled poem inviting any brave enough to trek through tremor zones and acid rains to find them. I know it's a death sentence for some, but survival always requires risk. If a handful reach that spring and make it back, the data they bring could save countless lives. I marshal every piece of knowledge I have, geology, meteorology, chemistry, to these transmissions. I explain how acid rain forms when sulfur dioxide and ash particles combine with moisture to create sulfuric. Acid SO plus HO yields HSU's hour, enemy rising from the sky. I urge listeners to mix baking soda into their catchment. Barrels, 2 teaspoons per liter, can neutralize acidity to pH 7, but baking soda is a rare commodity, smuggled only in handfuls by traders risking treacherous passes. Resource caches are our lifelines. We've mapped out hidden stashes, a pre-eruption FEMA depot sealed against fallout, a private bunker beneath a collapsed factory, secret caches left by supply chains that never arrived. I broadcast puzzle light, clues, street intersections, mile markers scorched into curbstones to guide anyone who still reads their compass. Each successful retrieval feels like a small victory against entropy. The crisis isn't static. It evolves daily. Ash clouds drift unpredictably, driven by shifting winds. Acid concentrations fluctuate with temperature swings. Tremors crack new canyons through roads. Every day brings a fresh complication booby-trapped supply caches, mutated rodents resistant to poisons, sudden telecommunication blackouts. I describe each development with urgent clarity. Sector 4 grid lines have collapsed to avoid the grid sector defined by latitude 40.73, longitude minus 73.93. My hands shake as I speak, but I force calm into my voice. Panic is contagious. Solutions spread more effectively when laced with steadiness. I close each segment with actionable bullet points. Step 1. Test your water with litmus. Strips it. Stays red. Neutralize with ash-filtered soda ash. Step 2. Seal your shelter against drafts with plastic sheeting and ash-filled sandbags. Step 3. Conserve batteries transmit only twice daily at dawn and dusk. Tense though the world may be, urgency keeps us alive. With every broadcast, I'm both the sentinel and the patient warning others to brace for impact, even as tremors buckle the floor beneath me. Survival has morphed into a science experiment, where the hypothesis is always, will we make it through another day? The data is bleak, but I keep running the trials, sharing the outcomes in real time, because knowledge is our bulwark against oblivion. Every fact, every piece of advice, every whispered coordinate is a weapon against the collapse. We may be boxed in by ash and acid, but our thoughts remain free-end. In thought lies the spark of resistance. So I pedal the generator, recalibrate the sensors, and speak into the gloom. Attention, all survivors. Resources tighten, dangers rise, but the fight continues. Follow these steps, trust your instincts, and keep moving toward whatever promise awaits beyond the horizon of ash. I'm here, I'm listening, and I'll keep talking because every voice matters. I can taste ash on my tongue the moment I step outside the booth each morning. The world beyond these concrete walls is turning more hostile by the hour. Yesterday, I scavenged what little remained of an old fire station for supplies canned, beans, a half-empty propane tank, a beat-up hand-crank radio. I emerged blinking through the gray gloom to find the wind had shifted, whipping fresh ash into my face and filling my lungs with grit. I coughed until I thought I'd crack a rib. By the time I limped back to camp, the beans were cold and gritty, and the propane tank refused to seal. Water is our most precious commodity now. I ration my supply 2 liters a day, boiled and filtered down to 1. Every unused drop is saved for emergencies, a firestorm that might drive us underground, a burst pipe in the infirmary, a desperate child's fever. Food follows the same cruel calculus. 1 tin of pork and beans stretches to days. wild plants, once a fallback, now grow laced with acid residues. Mushrooms sprout in fallout-clogged fields, but taste of sulfur and bitterness. Fishing yields, nothing but dead fish washed up on ash-oaked shores. Fuel is a line in the sand. Without it, communication dies. I once stocked a few extra jerrycans of diesel in a hidden corner of the booth, but a raider patrol discovered them 2 nights ago. They smashed the pumps, cursed at me, and left a bullet hole through the metal door as a warning. Now, every time I pedal the crank generator faster, the roar of desperation in my legs reminds me that fuel isn't the only thing bleeding out, so is hope. Last week, a gang calling themselves the Black Coils rolled into camp just before dawn. They were skeletons draped in scavenged camouflage, faces painted with ash and rage. Their leader a scar running from eyebrow to cheek brazenly demanded water and food. I offered them a half ration of stale biscuits. They spat them into the dust. 2 of my fellow survivors tried to fight back, but their makeshift knives shattered against rifle butts. I watched, frozen, as the Black Coils claimed our shelter, burned our sleeping bags for fuel, and left under a choking pall of laughter and ash that night. I lay curled on the cold concrete floor, listening to the echoes of their boots fade down. The corridor, I felt my pulse in my ears, loud as a drumbeat. My hands shook when I reached for the microphone to record the day's safety bulletin. "Avoid eastern sector," I said, voice trembling. "Black Coils active between grid lines." 47 and 52, I paused, swallowed, and added, "Stay indoors." Encounters with other survivors, not all encounters end in violence. 2 nights ago, around midnight, I heard footsteps in the corridor outside the booth. Heart hammering, I shouldered my pistol and cracked the door. There stood a parent older woman wrapped in tattered blankets, a young boy no older than 10 clutching her hand. Their eyes were wide with exhaustion. "I heard your broadcast," the woman rasped. "You told us how to treat acid burns." My son's arm. She lifted her sleeve to show raw, reddened flesh. I recognized the pattern of chemical injury immediately. I invited them in, broke out the last of my antiseptic, and dressed the wound as best I could. The boy, thin as a rail, whispered his name. Marco. His mother, Anna, said they'd been trekking from the north, following rumors of a clean spring beyond the tremor zone. I offered them my rations half, a can of beans each, and they accepted with tears. In that moment, I realized the power of connection. Their gratitude was like water to a parched throat. They stayed through the night, and over a weak fire in the barrel stove, we shared stories. They told me of a community of survivors who'd repurposed an old water treatment plant filtering acid rain and piping clean water to nearby settlements. It sounded like a myth, a fairy tale in a world gone mad, but theirs was a detailed description, precise coordinates, guard rotations, the hum of still functional turbines. Before dawn, the wind kicked up. The temperature had dropped sharply, and I could see my breath in the weak glow of my lamp. We huddled under layers of blankets, while outside the gale howled, sending razor-sharp ash slicing through any exposed skin. The storm lasted 12 hours, burying our camp under 6 inches of fresh fallout. Every surface was coated food cans, blankets, the generator crank. We spent the next 2 grueling hours brushing ash from our shelter, weaving cloth over air intakes and dripping water through cloth filters until even that became too dangerous. When the storm finally eased, we emerged to discover our most vulnerable, survivor Marco gasping, clutching his chest. The lung soreness from ash inhalation turned into a raging pneumonia overnight. We had no antibiotics left. Anna and I boiled willow bark tea and pressed hot compresses to his fevered skin. I wired an SOS on the airwaves, hoping a medical convoy might hear. But days passed in silence. His breathing grew more shallow, and on the fifth night, he slipped away while Anna cried against my shoulder. A new mystery, the water treatment plant. The story Anna and Marco brought haunts me. A working water treatment plant. Could it be real? All my geological maps mark that area as a high-risk lava flow zone, yet they describe intact intake pipes buried beneath volcanic rock, fed by an aquifer, untouched by surface contamination. It sounds too good to be true, but if such a place exists, it could transform our chances for survival. I shared the coordinates in my broadcast bud carefully, encoded amid a weather report. Barometric readings stable at 1,014 millibars. Expect clearing skies westward. Note, intake pressure at location 40.7484N, 73.9857W remains consistent at 2.3 atmospheres. Any listener attuned to my code will know where to go. But there's risk. Revealing the plant's existence might draw even bigger fleets of raiders. Do I protect it in silence, or broadcast the hope that could save thousands? Every choice fractures my faith in myself. In the quiet hours, when no one else is listening, I replay my decisions. When black coils attacked, I froze. When Anna and Marco arrived, I took a chance. I'm torn between the scientists' urge to preserve data and the survivors' need to protect resources. If I send a convoy to the plant, will they be merciful stewards or greedy scavengers? Hope feels like a flickering candle, weak against the gale outside, and yet I'm compelled to keep it alive. I think of Elena's unwavering belief in the power of knowledge, of Lily's dance steps that once brightened a sterile lab. There, memories compel me to broadcast that code, to offer the possibility of salvation, even if it's a trap. Better to die on the road chasing a myth than to surrender to the certainty of ash and acid back in the booth. The generator growls its warnings. The crank handle is splintering, and my legs grow to soar to maintain the required pedaling speed. Our community's morale is fraying. We gather around me every broadcast, faces drawn and hollow. When I discuss the plant, their eyes flicker with longing until I add the tremor zone warning. Then the tension returns, fear mingling with hope and back again. Last night, a heated argument broke out. A group wanted to leave at dawn to find the plant. Another insisted we fortify our current shelter and ration what remains. I raised my voice, rare failure, and told them I didn't have all the answers. It was the royest moment of leadership I'd shown, admitting uncertainty. The room went silent. Then Anna stepped forward, eyes fierce with determination. "We follow Miles," she said. "He's kept us alive this long. If that plant exists, we owe it to Marco and to ourselves to try." Her words were both blessing and burden. I felt the weight of every life in the room childware, all on edge. At midday, Anna spots movement dust kicking up behind a low ridge. We freeze. My students bring rifles to bear. I raise my hand, signaling restraint. Through binoculars, I see 3 riders on makeshift motor CYC.Ren, too weak for the trek, elders who would collapse at the first fissure, fighters who risked more than they could know. I realized leadership isn't about having answers. It's about carrying the burden of choice. Escalation. The journey begins at first light. We prepare. 4 of us, Anna, myself, 2 former students who once studied under Minnow rifles slung across their backs. We pack light, 5 days' worth of water rations, each dehydrated food packets, a GPS relic that still functions on battery. I tuck a folded map of seismic hotspots into my pocket. We set out toward the tremor-scarred hills beyond the eastern ridge. Every step is a negotiation with death. The earth cracks beneath our boots, opening fissures half a meter wide. Acid pits bubble in low spots, sending splumes of noxious steam into our faces. Each time we cross a fissure, I whisper a silent apology to the world I once knew apology and promise. We're all on edge. At midday, Anna spots movement dust kicking up behind a low ridge. We freeze. My students bring rifles to bear. I raise my hand, signaling restraint. Through binoculars, I see 3 riders on makeshift motorcycles. There, silhouettes outlined by ash. They slow, then kick up their legs and dismount. No weapons drawn, they approach empty-handed, palms raised when they speak. Their voices crackle over a borrowed radio frequency an offer of alliance. They claim to be from the Waterkeepers, the group that operates the plant. They propose a meeting point. They'll guide us in exchange for sharing any medical supplies we have, relief and suspicion, war in my chest. The Waterkeepers could be Salvation or another raider front. I glance at Anna, whose face is steeled by grief and resolve. She nods. I nod back. As we turn north, the tremors intensify. Each one feels like the earth rearing back before a final strike. I adjust the strap on my gas mask, my heart pounding. We are bound for a promised oasisaur, a deadly trap. I grip. Every fiber of my being screams for caution. Yet, beneath the fear, something fierce stirs, the stubborn ember of hope that has kept me pedaling. Broadcasting, surviving tomorrow, will reach the steeple. I carry the weight of every soul who's ever heard my voice, who's clung to my words as the last thread between life and obliteration. I carry Elena's laughter and Lily's dance in my bones, and I carry the promise of clean water, as elusive and vital as the whisper of wind before the storm. I never expected salvation to arrive on the back of a dust storm. We set out before first light, Anna at my side, and our 2 former students, Jade. The sky to the east was a sickly yellow, the ash-laden clouds roiling like an angry sea. Every breath we drew felt like swallowing sand, every step a negotiation with collapse. Yet in our pack lay the promise of water coordinates scrawled in Morse code, tucked into a plastic sleeve end that promise propelled us forward. By mid-morning, tremors rattled the ground beneath our boots. The hills ahead cracked in living, seams spitting miniature geysers of steam and ash were skirted around the largest fissures, following a narrow ridge that ought to have led to the ruined church steeple where the Waterkeepers promised to meet us. The air was thick with static, energy. My hair stood on end as though the world itself were charging for a final blow. Then the dust storm blew in. One moment the sky was yellow, the next it was black. A wave of choking ash rolled over us in seconds, obliterating sight beyond outstretched arms. Anna grabbed my hand, and Jade swept her scarf tight around her nose. We pressed together, moving by memory of the ridge's contours, but the world dissolved into an endless void of swirling grit and thunder. "Keep your masks sealed," I shouted, voice barely audible through the roar, my chest cramped with the effort of breathing filtered air. We stumbled forward, each step uncertain, every sense screaming in protest. The storm howled like a living thing, and I was certain it meant to swallow us whole. Suddenly, the tremors. Anna reeled, and I caught her before she plunged into a yawning chasm. The ground ruptured between them, splitting open like a cracked egg. Hassan's cry echoed in the black void, then cut off. I lunged toward him, but the ridge groaned and shifted. Ash rained down as the earth heaved. I caught a glimpse of Hassan's flashlight beam tumbling into darkness. His hand reached out briefly, white-knuckled, before slipping away. I screamed his name, but the storm swallowed it. Anna grabbed my arm. "We have to move," she rasped, panic coloring her voice. Now, torn between saving Hassan and escaping the quake, I closed my eyes. Every instinct screamed to launch myself into the abyss. Every rational thought warned of the storm's deadly embrace. Then a single word echoed in my mind: responsibility. Hassan's fate was on me. If I ran, I'd live with his death forever. If I stayed, all of us might perish. I made my choice. "Go," I said, voice cracking. "Get to the steeple. Anna, Jade, make it there. I'll follow." "No," Jade protested, but Anna shook her head. "He's right. We'll never get through this storm together. You know the way out." Anna pressed a hand to my shoulder, farewell and a benediction. I watched their silhouettes shrink until only hesitation remained. I stood at the edge of the fissure, heart pounding. The storm hammered at me, lashing. My coat with grit so fine it cut like glass. I swallowed a ragged breath and edged forward, the ridge narrowing underfoot. Every step threatened to send me tumbling into the yawning chasm where Hassan lay, perhaps already gone. But I could not abandon him, not like this. I inched along the ridge, moving as close to the edge as I dared. The quake aftershock shook my boots, and I stumbled, catching myself on a jutting chunk of rock. My hand slipped on the ash a split second that felt like eternity. I thought of the promises I'd made to Anna, to the scattered listeners who clung to my broadcasts, to Hassan himself when he first joined our ragtag group. I could not let them down. I knelt and reached over the fissure, peering into the inky maw. Hassan's torch lay on a narrow ledge half a meter below. His handprint smudged the rock beside it. I saw a flicker of movement, his boot brushing the ledge's edge. He was alive. My heart thundered. I grabbed a length of paracord from my belt, fashioned a loop at its end, and shouted, "Hassan, tie this around your wrist and climb." His voice crackled from below, a whisper lost in the gale. I roared, planting my feet and wrapping the cord around the ridge's anchor spikes. The ash storm shredded my words, but he saw the cord swinging like a lifeline. He tied it and began. Back and forth I swung the loop, up and down he climbed. Finally, he emerged, hurling himself onto the narrow path before collapsing. Beside me, neither of us spoke. We lay on the ridge as the storm battered us, breathing through our masks, grateful for the miracle of breath itself. Hassan's eyes were wide as he stared at me. "You saved me," he rasped. "We save each other," I answered, stroking the ash from his forehead. Then, as if in answer to our whispered prayers, the storm began to abate. The howling subsided to a low groan. The sky lightened to a charcoal gray, stained by soot, but unmistakable. A cluster of dim lights flickered at its base. "Come on," I said, hoisting Hassan to his feet. "We're not done yet." We crept down the ridge toward the steeple, every step a testament to grit and desperation. As we neared, the lights resolved into human figures for people in tattered uniforms, rifles slung at their sides. At their center stood a woman whose face I recognized from Aina's descriptions, Mara, leader of the Waterkeepers. Her eyes were sharp, her posture erect despite the storm's ravages. "Miles Harrington," she called, voice clear though distant. "We wondered if your legend was real." I raised a shaking hand in greeting. "It's Miles, and it's been a hell of a day." Her gaze flicked to Hassan, then back to me. "We saw your signal. You saved your companion. Good. But you've risked everything." I swallowed. "We had no choice." Mara nodded. "Bravery and foolishness are siblings here. Welcome to the turning point." She gestured toward the low-lying building beside the steeple subterranean hatch, half buried in ash. "Through there is the intake manifold. It's fractured, clogged, but the aquifer below is clean. You're the first outsiders we've allowed inside in months." A surge of relief and awe flooded me. Years of longing for clean water, years of death and ash and acid, all coalesced into that moment, the turning point. But Mara wasn't done. "We have a problem," she said, stepping aside to reveal a barrel-shaped sensor array blinking at warning. "They're coming." Before I could ask who they were, a tremor rattled the ground. Light flashed as the hatch's support beams buckled. Then a new sound, low, unmistakable, the droning hum of engines. Through the haze, I saw vehicles for flatbed trucks with armored doors racing toward the steeple. Raiders drawn like moths to this oasis. Mara's team scrambled, fanning out with weapons raised. Hassan crouched beside me, eyes wide. "They want our water," Mara said, loading a magazine. "If we lose this intake, every survivor out there dies," I inhaled, feeling the weight of my decision. We had reached the promised source, but now had to defend it with everything we had. I thought of Anna and Jade still fighting their way through the storm, of the survivors depending on us, of the last seedling just taking root in the sediment pond. "Tell me what to do," I said, shoulder easing the rifle Mara handed me. Her nod was grim with urgency. "Aim for the tires. We'll hold them off as long as we can, but if they breach the hatch, we blow the manifold and flood the aquifer, sacrificing this plant to keep the water underground." A cold not formed in my chest destroyed the only source of clean water to deny the raiders, or let them have it and leave the thirsty masses to die elsewhere. There was no right answer, only survival's bleak calculus. The first truck roared into range, its headlights slicing through the ash. Mara's team opened fire. I crouched behind a ruined gravestone, rifle trembling in my hands. My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear the crack of gunfire. I exhaled, aimed low at the lead vehicle's front tire, and squeezed the trigger. The round struck true. The truck swerved, biting deep into a trench, and came to a halt. But the other three pressed on. Mara shouted orders. I reloaded and fired again, crippling the second. The third was to Fastid's ram bar smashed through the guardrail and charged. The hatch entrance. Mara's second-in-command, Calder, lifted a satchel charge and hurled it at the approaching vehicle. The explosion rocked the ground, sending a fireball into the black sky. Shrapnel rained down, and I staggered as a piece nicked my shoulder-burning pain flaring. I gritted my teeth, dragged myself forward, and slammed the hatch's emergency lock. The steel doors clanged shut behind us, sealing the intake chamber. Inside, the cold hiss of pressure valves filled the air. Mara slammed a lever. Blast doors slid closed, cutting off the chamber. We were sealed in isolation, our only defense. I sank to my knees as the roar of engines faded, replaced by the hiss of hydraulic systems and the distant crackle of gunfire. Bruised, bloody, but alive. Hassan slid down beside me, panting. We did it, he whispered. I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling the tremor of tears. We did it, I echoed, though I wasn't sure what it meant anymore. Outside the hatch, I knew the raiders raged. They'd try every tactic to breach the plant. We might hold them off, or we might lose everything in a final blast. But in that sealed chamber, in the hiss of valves and the flicker of emergency lights, I felt something I hadn't dared feel in months. Possibility. The water was here. Our turning point had arrived, blood-stained and terrifying, but ours too. Seize or surrender. I pressed a hand against the frost-laced wall, closed my eyes, and let the gravity of the moment settle in. No longer merely a voice on the radio. I was part of the battle for tomorrow's survival, and I would not let it slip away. The dust settles around the water treatment plant long before the tremors finally subside. When the dust storms clear and the acrid steam from broken pipes dissipates, we stand a ragged survivors on the cracked concrete apron of a facility half buried in volcanic debris. The pumps lie silent, their catchment basins clogged with pumice. Rusted valves leak acid-tainted runoff into oily pools at our feet. Yet, through the haze, I see something I haven't seen in months. A trickle of clear water seeping from a fracture in the intake manifold. It gathers in a tin bowl we set down, forming perfect, colorless droplets that glisten in the weak sun. We fell to our knees, choked back tears. Anna plunged her hand into the pool, cupping water like a blessing, then raised it to her lips. The taste was pure no metallic bite, no chemical Bernoulli life. We took turns drinking, each swallow igniting a spark of disbelief and relief. For the first time since the eruption, survival felt possible rather than impossible. Reconstruction began almost immediately. We cleared ash from sedimentation tanks and fashioned makeshift filters from salvaged membranes and cloth. I rigged the old turbine to a hand crank and bicycle generator, coaxing it to spin at a fraction of its designed RPM. Water dribbled through, then gushed. We rigged hoses from the holding tanks to a series of jerrycans and old barrels carried from camp, setting up a distribution system that could serve dozens more if we could defend it. Defending it proved our next trial. Word of a working plant spread quickly. A band of raiders different from the black coils attacked under cover of night, hoping to seize the flow. We lost to makeshift guard towers, to claw-hammered rifles, and flamethrower traps we'd fashioned. From propane tanks discharged in a blaze that illuminated the ash-choked sky, I crawled into the night, heart pounding, to pull survivors from the wreckage. By dawn, the raiders lay disarmed and begging for mercy. We'd taken 10 prisoners, but our victory tasted of ash and dread. In the aftermath of that skirmish, I realized that hope demands vigilance. We fenced the perimeter with barbed wire and booby traps, trained guards in shifts, and broadcast a call for peace-on invitation to all survivor groups to share in the water, so long as they respected its sanctity. Some answered, arriving with baskets of berries and packets of aspirin. Others came masked, rifles at the ready, only to retreat when they saw our numbers and resolve. As weeks turned into months, the plant became a beacon. Small orchards of acidrous willows sprang up around filtered runoff channels, their roots drawing toxins from the soil. Algae began to colonize settling ponds, gradually restoring a fragile balance. I watched through cracked windows as the first dragonflies mutated, perhaps, but unmistakable, danced over the water's surface. Life was returning. I broadcast daily updates, pH readings, flow rates, guard schedules, and medical alerts. But more than data, I spoke of the plant's symbolism of humanity's capacity to rebuild, even in the wake of cataclysm. My voice, once a lone echo in the void, now carried the collective heartbeat of a settlement reshaped by resilience. I told stories of the first child born here who took her first breath inhaling filtered air, of the elderly couple who planted the first sapling in patched-together soil, of Anna, who led a team to clear a path to an old orchard beyond the exclusion zone. And yet I carry scars, nightmares of fiery ashfalls haunt my sleep. I wake with hands shaking, convinced the ground is splitting beneath me. The memory of Marco's fevered gasp, Anna's tears on my shoulder, the cold, dead weight of his small body, these images are etched in my mind. I've learned that hope does not erase grief. It coexists with it, a fragile flame that burns brightest, against the darkness of memory in the quiet hours before dawn. When I climb the stairs to the plant's roof and scan the horizon, I feel a profound stillness, both terrifying and consoling. The horizon is still lined with volcanic peaks, their slopes coated in layers of ash. Distant tremors rumble, reminding us of the Earth's fury. Acid rain falls unpredictably, though our catchment ponds shield us. And yet, in the filtered twilight, I can see green shoots emerging among the gray rubble, lichens colonizing concrete, hardy wildflowers pushing through cracks, a tentative revival of nature that mirrors our own. I am changed. Once I spoke into the void, a solitary scientist reciting facts. Now I stand as a witness to regeneration, a steward of fragile systems, both human and environmental. I have swapped data sheets for tenacious optimism, acknowledging that building a future requires both knowledge and faith. I have traded isolation for community, learning that true survival is woven from the connections between us. The world remains. Broken, unpredictable tremors, acid rains, and ash storms still sweep across the land. But we have carved out a sanctuary. We have proven that life can persist even when the sky itself turns to ashes. And in every measured drop of water, in every green sprout, we glimpse a promise, that from the ashes of catastrophe, a new chapter can begin. I turn from the horizon, breath visible in the cold dawn air, and speak into the microphone. This is Miles Harrington, broadcasting from Sanctuary Plant Alpha. We have clear water, we have hope, we have each other. Stay vigilant, stay resilient. Remember, every tomorrow is ours to shape. I don't know what the next dawn will bring. The horizon beyond the plant still trembles with low rumbles, as if the earth itself hesitates before each new breath. The ash that falls now is finer, more like midwinter snow than the choking hail that marked the early days, but it still paints the world in shades of gray. I can see faint hints of green around Sanctuary Plant alpha willow saplings, wild grasses, and the stubborn lichens reclaiming cracked concrete, but the fragility of that green is never far from my mind. Hope is a precarious thing. I've learned this in the tremors that split our pipes, in the acid rains that threatened our harvests, in the nightly raids by desperate survivors and cold-eyed mercenaries alike. Each day we win a small victory, an extra liter of water, a failed tremor that spares our walls, but every win invites its own shadow. The more the plant flourishes, the more eyes turn toward it, the more lives we save, the more hearts we mourn when sickness or violence strikes again. Tonight, I broadcast by candlelight. The generator rests silent in the corner, awaiting its next infusion of fuel or muscle. My voice crackles over the airwaves. This is Miles Harrington. It's been 6 months since I first pedaled that crank and spoke into the void. We built this plant from ash and steel, and we've held it against all odds. But survival is no finish line. The road stretches on, and every step demands vigilance. I pause, listening for a response. Static answers mean no cheers, no tears, no voices calling in from the dark. But I've learned not to wait for applause. Sometimes the ripples of one broadcast take days or weeks to reach another settlement, carried on patched-together radios and whispered rumors. Behind me, Anna adjusts the filtration membranes, her sleeves rolled up to reveal scars from earlier burns. She glances at me without speaking. I know what she's thinking. The plant's success has brought life back to this wasteland, but at the cost of exhaustion and sacrifice. Marco's memory lingers in her eyes, the boy she carried, who believed in this plant with a child's certainty. I step over to her and lay a hand on her shoulder. She nods, once resolute. I return to the mic. We've tested the water every hour. pH holds steady at 7.1. Pathogen levels are undetectable. The willows planted along the runoff channels are thriving. Dragonflies have colonized Pond 3. These aren't just data points. They're proof that nature responds when we give it a chance. My words are measured, but my heart pounds. Outside, storm clouds gather on the western ridge. The barometer reads a rapid drop. Another acid front could strike before sunrise. Tomorrow will seal the intake valves and batten down the plant. Tomorrow we'll decide if it's worth the risk to open the flumes and collect rainwater again. Tomorrow we'll face another test because survival never ends. I've spent years studying environmental collapse in classrooms and journals. I never imagined I'd become part of the data living inside a case study on resilience. Yet here I am, scribbling notes in the margins of a tattered logbook. Day 187. Raids repelled. Storm incoming. communique sent to Outpost 12. My handwriting is shaky, but I've preserved every entry. One day, someone or maybe a future generation might read this and learn how we eked out an existence in the shadow of a supervolcano. We have lost too much to forget. Elena's voice still echoes in my dreams, calling my name through layers of ash. I wake with tears on my pillow, convinced I can still reach her in the smoke and dust. Lily's music box, with its chipped ballerina, spins in the corner of the Buthon artifact of joy that I wind each morning, letting the tin melody compete with the hum of broadcasts. Some say keeping such reminders is folly, that they anchor us to pain. But I disagree. They anchor us to what we fight for. In the hush that follows my broadcast, I stand and walk to the glass viewing port overlooking the plant. The turbines sit idle under the storm clouds, silent watchdogs awaiting orders. Floodlights at the perimeter cast long shadows against the Ashladon ground, where guards patrol in pair shadows themselves, since their faces are obscured by gas masks and fatigue. I lean my forehead against the cold glass. The world outside is broken, but not beyond mending. I remember a passage from an old textbook quoted in a lecture that now seems like a fairy tale. Ecosystems, when given minimal resources and time, will reestablish equilibrium. I cling to that sentence like a lifeline. We've proven it here. The willows draw toxins. The algae colonize the water. The insects return. Maybe one day birds will follow on currents of wind, and their songs will echo through this valley once more. Yet I cannot pretend the future is certain. Acid rains may return in fiercer storms. Tectonic shifts may destroy our intake lines. Disease may sweep through our growing community. Every day we live is a victory. Every breath a triumph against the odds. And each triumph is fragile. Constant tending, repairing, rebuilding. I step away from the window and switch off the live feed. The microphone clicks, silent. The empty booth feels cavernous without the hum of electricity. I move to my cot in the corner, where a thin mattress and threadbare blanket await. Ana's soft snore drifts in from the infirmary next door, where she checks on a child with a fever. I envy her sleep, brief as it might be. I lie down and pull the blanket tight, scratching out the remaining lines in my logbook. Final entry, day 187. We have water, we have hope, we have each other. Tomorrow we will breathe again so long. As our breaths continue, this story will too. I close my eyes. In the darkness, I pray for strength. I pray for clear skies and fertile soil. I pray for the courage to keep speaking into the silence, to keep guiding whoever listens toward safety, toward life. My final message, though it is never truly final, echoes in my mind. Stay alive, stay human, even when the world seems lost. Our humanity remains our greatest resource. We rebuild in the ash, we nurture in the darkness, and we remember that every tomorrow is ours to shape. Keep fighting, keep talking, keep hoping, and as I drift into a sleep weighted by both exhaustion and anticipation, I know that when I wake, I will rise again to pedal the crank, to polish the filters, to speak into the static. Because hope may be fragile, but it is the only thing strong enough to carry us through the night.